is kind of the enduring allure of Elvis. I mean, you know, he's obviously more famous now than when he was alive. He certainly seems to sell more records now. What is it about the myth, the legend, the man? Why is there so much fascination about him that still retains decades after his passing?
Well, I think he was the complete package from a rock star's point of view. When you look back on the early days, I think the things that endeared him to so many fans were his self-deprecation to a point. He never seemed to take himself overly seriously and came across as quite shy, but then also came across as very sexy to the girls. Mm-hmm. And you know, he was a good-looking guy. He had good features. He had great stage charisma. He really had everything going for him. To me, he was the complete package. I mean, the gods smiled on him when he was born, because he had everything. And yet he had that sort of self-deprecating modesty about him that really did attract hordes of women. And I think possibly the reason that his name and his legend has lasted so long, a lot of what has had to do with it was the way he died young. I think when you're always around, and you're still around, let's say for today, there's no mystique about you. But when you die so young under tragic circumstances, it creates a mystique. It creates the legend, basically. And there's no doubting of all entertainers that have ever lived. Probably Elvis surpassed all of them, surpassed Sinatra, surpassed Michael Jackson, to the point where he is the absolute top legend of all time.
No, absolutely. It's funny as you're saying that. I was going to bring that up actually. That careful how I phrase this, but I think while it's tragic, anyone that passes, particularly in the entertainment kind of sphere or respect to that area, it does certainly it contributes to, as you say, a mystique and allure, a sort of a legendary status. You think James Dean, you think of, I don't know, Jim Morrison, you think of River Phoenix, you think of all these people that, and they do even today, don't they? They seem to have a bigger, and I think you're right, obviously Sinatra, huge, a legend in his own right, but I don't know, not seemingly on the same level as an Elvis or some of the others I've mentioned, that kind of, you feel like it was almost, obviously their life was cut short and you were kind of kidded out of so much more that they could have brought, right? I think, I think it was, I read you said that, the premature death meant that we never really got to see or hear him perform as much as we should. And therefore he almost became a fantasy of sorts, and that's why he lives on, through tribute acts, through worldwide fan clubs, through record sales, through however you want to name it. That seems to be the case, right?
Well, that's where, what you say is absolutely right, is the fact that if you make a comparison, let's say you make a comparison with someone like Sinatra, who probably in his day probably had as many female admirers and had as much of a living legend as much a living legend as Elvis was. But the fact that Elvis died tragically so young, that legend just got bigger and bigger as time went on. Whereas when you're always there, like Sinatra lived to be an old man, when you're always there, people tend to just sort of take you for granted. But when you leave us prematurely, many around the world, who, including myself, that never got the opportunity to see him perform live, it just creates this incredible mystique about the person. And you're absolutely right. That's why there are so many Elvis Presley impersonators around the world, because they're filling the void, they're filling the gap that was left by his premature passing, and the fact that he never did ultimately get to tour around the world.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, look, I'm going to hold my hands. Obviously, I'm a huge music aficionado and have been all my life, and know Elvis. I grew up with him. My mum was a huge Elvis fan, always playing Elvis records, but I probably didn't know the full, like with many things, you don't know the full story until you really dig deeper. And for me, I'm interested to get your thoughts, going off piece a little bit here, but when I watched the recent Baz Luhrmann movie, Elvis, that provided, or provided so many, or filled in so many gaps, I guess, for me that I was unaware of that were quite surprising. I mean, the way he was brought up, the fact that he never did tour globally, that he was kind of held hostage to an extent under the contract in Vegas, etc., etc. And what did you make of that movie? Just purely out of interest, like being a big Elvis fan. I mean, what do you think? It was a good one, or?
Let me sum it up this way. I thought Austin, who played Elvis, of course, I thought he was fantastic. I thought the way he embodied Elvis and actually grew into the role. And I thought as the movie progressed, that he really grew into the role. That even towards the end of the film, you forgot you weren't looking at an actor. You were sort of felt you were looking at Elvis or a recreation of Elvis. The film, look, I think with any Baz Luhrmann film, it's an acquired taste. It's Baz has his own slant on the way he wants to do things, and there are aspects of the film that I really liked, and there are other aspects of the film that I didn't like. So I think it's helped, enhance the legend, thanks to the performance of the actor who played him.
Would it be fair to say as well? I think on that, it's kind of brought it again to a newer audience as well. I think
to a much younger audience. When you hear radio stations like Smooth and picking up Elvis songs that you hadn't probably heard on anything other than AM for the last 30, 40 years, and then all of a sudden his music's being played on Smooth and other more contemporary radio stations, it just shows the impact that the film had.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's funny what you say about an acquired taste, and Baz Luhrmann kind of, wanted to depict things in his own manner. And a friend of mine, I don't know if this is an accurate comparison, but he compared it to the way Oliver Stone works, in the fact that he kind of gets a subject or a topic, and he very much like a bull in a china shop. He goes with that in his way, in his interpretation. Obviously, he did the Doors movie many moons ago, and that kind of, where some people saw some positives, a lot of people panned that, saying, "Look, you're not." So I can kind of get where you're coming from. Again, for me personally, I just thought there were several things, particularly on his younger years and his upbringing, that I was completely unaware of, and it just made me admire him, I guess, even more so. So I wouldn't say I'm one of the new young generation, not quite, but it certainly, it enhanced and helped me understand the legend that little bit more. One last one before we come to the show, and I'm just purely curious, and I hope you don't mind me asking this, but obviously a huge body of work, Elvis. What's your personal favourite Elvis song, if indeed you have one? Is it "How Long's a Piece of String," or
Yeah, look, I probably have two favourites, I guess. Can't Help Falling in Love from the movie Blue Hawaii, because I went and saw that movie as a young child. I went and saw a lot of Elvis's early movies as a young child. Viva Las Vegas, Love Me Tender. I was as a kid, I was a real movie buff. So in respect to his early stuff, most definitely Can't Help Falling in Love. I think I even sang that on a kid's television show once.
Brilliant.
And later on, probably Suspicious Minds, I think. Cool. I just love the guitar intro, the sort of the arpeggio finger picking guitar that goes all the way through it. Those would be probably my two favorites from two different Elvis Presley eras.
Yeah, no, interesting. If I Can Dream is probably one of my favorites, just purely again because my mum used to literally play it non-stop when I was a young man, so it gives me fond memories of that from a personal perspective. But
well, that song's got a great build in it. It really builds up towards the end, and I love the way it builds up. It's also another favorite of mine too.
I mean, again, I kind of tongue in cheek say how long is a piece of string, but it kind of is. I think it's apt when you're trying to analyze a body of work that's not only so extensive but also so good. I think it's hard to pinpoint one or two, but I don't know. I'm always curious. I always try and put people on the spot and ask that question. So thank you very much for your candid response. So, okay, look, that's great. It gives me, again, it sets the scene a wee bit. It kind of enhances that notion of the man, the myth, the legend. The show, obviously, upcoming. Let's turn our attention to that. Clearly, it's going to be a big deal. Tell me about it. I mean, why did it come about? How did it come about? Boom.
Well, it came about. I was talking about this the other day, I was reminded that Johnson Peters, who is the creative director of the show, myself being the producer, we were having coffee about 6 years ago, and we'd just been to see yet another underwhelming concert that we'd paid a lot of money for, where the artist, no names, no pactrial, where the artist was not what he once was. The lighting was substandard, the sound was substandard, and we walked out of there feeling we'd been dudded. And we were having a coffee afterwards, and I said, this is becoming more the norm than the exception. I said, these concerts that really appear to only be put on so that people can make money and not really entertain the audience. Look, I can understand we're all in it to make money. We're not in it to lose money. But it was just becoming so prevalent that we'd go to shows and be let down. So out of that coffee meeting or discussion that John and I had, we decided to put on an Elvis show at the Melbourne Town Hall. And John, being an extremely creative person who really has taught himself how to use the latest technology, and he's really a whiz-bang specialist at it, he sort of said to me, he said, we need to just add more than just a few lights and decent sound. We need to create an experience for an audience. And I said, well, can you elaborate? And he said, well, we need to create something that is a cut above everything else. And I said, yeah, well, that's a heck of a challenge, because if you're going to do that, it's going to cost a lot of money. So anyway, cut a long story short, we bit the bullet, and I came up with the title of Elvis, King of the World, because that's what I felt he was in the entertainment industry. He was the king, and he was the king of the world. There was no one bigger. So I said, well, I've given you the title. Now you've got to create the show that fits the title.
Follow that up, yeah.
So we booked the Melbourne Town Hall, and we put on this show where John built visuals around some of the songs, many of the songs. And he decided to sort of tell the Elvis Presley story in music, which at the time I thought was a bit of a risk. I said, people are going to these concerts to see, and hear music. And he said, yeah, but we've got to give them something more than that. We've got to give them an experience. So we put it on, we sold it out, and the audience went ballistic. They loved it. They loved what we did. And over the next few years, we kept.
Marty, when was that? I'm so sorry.
That was 2017.
Okay, cool.
About 6 years ago. And then in subsequent years, in the meantime, I'd moved to the US in 2017, but not on a permanent basis. I was living half the time in the US and half the time back in Australia. It did wonders for my frequent flyer points. I think we did the next concert in 2019, I think, but we kept adding to the numbers. Like we had over 50 musicians the first one, and I think in the second one we had about 70 musicians. So we promoted as having over 70 musicians on stage. So the sound was getting bigger, the production was getting bigger, the costs were getting bigger. But again, it was a huge success. And so then last year we went for the big kahuna. Last year we went to stage the biggest Elvis concert ever staged anywhere in the world, with over 100 musicians and singers on stage. And we did a bit of research and found out that the most that Elvis ever performed with on stage was 47, was the largest orchestra he ever performed with. So we had more than, we had more than double that. We had 109. And the people from the Australian Book of Records came along. We sold out Harbour Hall in Melbourne a month before the show, and this is despite COVID. This is despite 3 postponements, and in the middle, and shutdowns in the middle of COVID. We still managed to sell it out a month in advance, and
Wow.
it was just an unbelievable experience, I think, for everybody. I had a friend in the audience who I bumped into out in the foyer after the show, and he was in tears. And I said, "Gee, Hank," I said, "tears of joy or tears?"
Let's hope so, right?
And he said, "Marty, I have to say, today I felt, because it was an afternoon show, Sunday afternoon. He said, today I felt I was watching Elvis Presley on stage."
Wow, it doesn't get much better than that, right?
No. And, the sound, because of the 100+ orchestra and choir and all that, the sound was just mind-blowing. And we were on stage. John was awarded the world record by the Australian Book of Records for the biggest Elvis concert ever staged. So after that show finished, now I'm getting to where we are now. After that show finished, we took inquiries from New Zealand, from Italy, and from the United States, interested in wanting to take this show to those places. But as you can probably imagine, the cost is just absolutely prohibitive. But we got a call from David Lazarus in New South Wales, and David said, "Look, I want to put this on in Sydney. Are you interested?" So David flew down to Melbourne. We had a meeting near Tullamarine Airport. David just came down literally to meet with us, and shouted us lunch, which I was very appreciative for. Both of us were. And we came to an agreement. And we looked around for venues in Sydney. We were looking at the Opera House. We were looking at. We couldn't put it on at the State Theatre because the State Theatre just doesn't have big enough stage. So we were pretty much looking at the Opera House or Darling Harbour Theatre, and Darling Harbour Theatre was the only venue out of the two that could give us the date we wanted. Give us a date, and we're absolutely delighted that we're putting it on there, because we've since had the opportunity to see this magnificent new theatre, and we think it's absolutely perfect for this production. And we're going to have a crack at actually breaking that world record again.
Oh, wow. So in respect of what, the number of musicians involved, the number of participants?
So what we need to have is in excess of 109 musicians and singers on stage. And John is quietly confident that we can achieve that.
Gosh, I mean, you're only, where are we now? Losing track. Well, you're about what, 6 weeks? About 6 weeks away from it. Is that right?
Yeah,
Such longer.
We're probably 6 weeks away from it.
So I can imagine, obviously, this has been the rehearsals, etc., have been ongoing for. How do they work? I mean, how long do they tend to go on for? Is it months?
Well, every member of the rhythm section has the music, and has been rehearsing for weeks now. It's almost a totally new show to the one that was in Melbourne. John's literally rewritten the whole show, because there's a lot of Elvis stuff that we didn't use in Melbourne. And there's a lot about Elvis's history that we didn't use in Melbourne. Of course, in the last 12 months, it's been rewritten again with the passing of his daughter. So it's pretty much a whole new show. And now with the addition of some extra musicians and singers, we're quietly confident that we're going to break that record that we set in Melbourne. And it'll be almost a year to the day, because I think from memory, the show in Melbourne last year was August the 14th, and this one in Sydney is August the 12th. So it'll be incredibly spectacular.
Nice symmetry, yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be like nothing a lot of the audience will have ever seen before. And I hark back to that coffee that I had with John 6 years ago, and what our goal was to actually produce shows that just leave an everlasting memory in people's minds, and an experience that people will never forget. And we are now, because we work so closely together, we're now applying that to our next show. And you'd be familiar with this. Our next tour, which is the Rock Proms, which we're touring Australia with later in the year, starting in the same month, August, but going right around the country. And it's based on the tradition of the Royal Albert Hall, London.
Yeah.
The night of the Proms. And
I saw a clip actually. I think it was a clip of you as to how you got into that, and that sounds absolutely awesome. I mean, tell me about that a little.
Well, I got the inspiration for it. I was living in Europe at the time. This is back in the late '80s, I think it was, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was living in London, and he rang me up and he said, "Mate, I've got a couple of tickets to the last night of the Proms. Are you interested in going?" And I got to say, I wasn't all that keen because, I wasn't into. I thought it was going to be a traditional orchestral concert, the classics.
Yeah.
I said, "Mate, look, I'm really not all that interested in sitting there for a couple of hours and just listening to orchestral stuff, And he said, "What if I told you that Status Quo was playing with the orchestra?" And I said, the famous rock band, Status Quo, the guys, rocking all over the world. Whatever
Rick Parfitt.
Rick Parfitt and the guys,
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, mate, they're in it. They're performing in it." And I said, "Where's my ticket?"
You changed your tune pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, I changed very quickly, almost in mid sentence, And I went along, Ben, and I got to tell you, it's probably to this day the best concert I've ever been to. I was just blown away. I was sitting in the audience, and the orchestra walked out, and I thought, "Yeah, okay, all right. Well, what's happening? Where's Status Quo?" And the orchestra sat down. They did this amazing overture. And I suddenly realized the overture was based around their hit song, Whatever You Want, right? Whatever You Want, right? But it was done classical style. And I'm listening, I'm going, "What's this all about?" And then all of a sudden, after this overture had played for about 5 minutes, all of a sudden the lights came up, or a spotlight came up, and here were the two guitar players down the front, and they went into Whatever You Want,
Oh, cool. Like it, yeah.
And then it just rocked the place down. And then the horn section got up and when they were on the accents of the music, they were raising the trombones and putting the trombone. It was like watching an orchestra at a rock concert.
Yeah. It's so funny because as you were explaining that then, Marty, I know a couple of friends who back in the UK, and it sounds very similar, but it's more the sort of the electronic dance music genre. And I think it's at the Royal Albert Hall actually, and I think that's one of the big renowned orchestras, and they kind of emulate that, and it's kind of fused together. And I had friends saying, "Oh no, never in a million years, I'm not into classical music. I can't think of anything worse." Blah blah blah. And I think his wife kind of pulled him along begrudgingly. And he was blown away, exactly as you described there. He said, when the string section stand and then the bassoon or something, and he said, hairs on the back of the neck were up. It was because they're not classical in the term classical music. They're classic songs for him in that genre, in the sort of dance music, that whole sort of electronic music. And he said it was absolute. Now he goes every year. Completely sold on it. So I can understand where you're coming from in that. Despite the initial hesitancy, you were absolutely blown away. Right?
I was, and that feeling, as you say, the hair standing up on the back of your neck, and that feeling when the show was finally over, and I walked out of there, and I thought to myself, someday, somehow, I've got to bring this show or a variation of this show to Australia. And that's what the Rock Prom's about. I want people in Australia to experience what I experienced that night, which and it's like I come back to the whole experiencing. I come back to the whole reason why John and I sit here today with the Elvis show that we've done, and now with Rock Proms to follow on from that, and trying to give audiences an experience that they've never had before, because there is a lot of mediocrity around. there is definitely, and we're trying to raise the bar, to be honest.
And I think, look, you touched upon it earlier, Martin. No one's a charity. Of course, profits and et cetera, et cetera. And you want to make a buck out of anything that you do. But I think equally as well, and I can hear it just in your voice, if you don't mind me saying it. I think that notion of providing something that really touches someone, and they go home or the family goes home, and it's kind of a living memory that's priceless to us. You can't put a cost on that, And I think having that impact on many, many, many people, if that's your inspiration, that's your driver, well, you can't go far wrong, in my humble opinion. I think that's what it's got to be about, right? About doing it for the right reasons,
Yeah, exactly right. Well, what we hope to do is establish the Rock Proms as a regular thing, so that we can do Rock Proms in the years to come. Just change the show, change the format, but give people that experience of combining what is intrinsic, what is theoretically a classical setup. And the only change we make is by putting an absolute raging rock band in amongst the middle of it and get them all to behave like rock stars.
Mosh pit, yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess as well, I mean, with that as well, without comparing it to the Elvis, because again, Elvis has got such a huge catalogue. As you say, you're rewriting the upcoming one. There's so many songs and aspects that you haven't covered previously. But I guess with the Rock Proms, it's almost indefinite, right? You could have so many different bands or different, every year you could have a different, you could have the Status Quo one to start, you could have Queen, you could, obviously within reason, but you know what I mean? I think you have
Well, the repertoire is endless, absolutely endless. And what John has been able to do, for an example, we do a Queen medley in the Rock Proms, and what John is doing visually on stage is he's recreating Wembley Stadium.
Cool.
With that massive crowd and everything, and just putting everybody on stage into that whole visual aspect, So we're trying to transport audiences to where it all happens, so that they can get a feel for what absolutely blew tens of thousands of people away. And that's what John is trying to create. And I've seen some of the footage, and it's amazing.
And I think, again, I think you said he's very much got his finger on the pulse of sort of tech innovation, etc. And you have that opportunity now, right, to sort of engage people in experiences, whereas even a decade ago you couldn't. You were just in the crowd and whatever visuals or whoever was performing. Now that interaction's gone to a whole new different level, right? And I think that is going to appeal to so many people, because so many people weren't at Wembley obviously when that famous occasion occurred. So yeah, I think that sounds really exciting. I'll look out for that for sure. It actually just reminds me, I've got another good friend who's he's a Rod Stewart impersonator down in Australia. He's quite popular down there as well. His name's Dave Patton. You've probably never heard of him, but I always see posts of his in various areas of Australia. He does one with an Elton John impersonator as well. They do like a double act together. So yeah, I mean, tribute acts obviously huge. Coming back to the Elvis one, I just want to ask you very quickly on you mentioned about Elvis impersonators, and there's tens of thousands, right? I mean, in all four corners of the earth, no matter where you are. I remember living in Tokyo and going every Sunday to a place called Harajuku, and it was just crazy. They had this thing where it was almost like a set of rockabilly fans, and they set up in a circle and they put a big radio, down, but the amount of Elvis impersonators, and it's just so cool seeing Japanese, and they style the hair and they got the suit on, and I mean, even seeing it there where Japan, so foreign, you can't get more. Clearly, he still resonates even there. I think you've said that there's some half decent ones, there's some pretty bad ones, and there's some really good ones. And it sounds like Paul and Anthony are in the latter category there, clearly. Otherwise, they wouldn't be the protagonists in your show. But tell me just a little bit about those guys, father and son. What makes them so special? What is it about them that makes them stand out from the countless other impersonators around the world?
Well, what drew me to the father and son was the fact that there are so many Elvis shows around at the moment. You know yourself, I'm sure, about the Elvis Revolution stage show that's happening at the State Theatre, and now they've just announced another Elvis show where they're bringing more Elvises into Australia. They're just everywhere. I open Instagram in the morning, and I'm bombarded by Elvises. So so I was looking for a point of difference. I thought, we've used in the past, we reckon that we had the two best Elvises in Australia for the earlier shows, but we wanted something really different for this one. And I'd heard about Paul and I'd heard about Anthony, and I didn't know much about Anthony at all. I'd heard about Paul, and he's a decent. He's a good Elvis impersonator, but I knew nothing about Anthony. So I did some research on Anthony, and I got him to send me some stuff. And I thought, this kid's pretty good. This kid looks great. And I thought, how good would it be if you can just suspend your imagination a little bit for a couple of hours? How good would it be to actually watch Elvis circa the early days and then just seamlessly segue into Elvis in Vegas? By using a father and son, because let's put it this way: Anthony's only 25, and he's not going to look like Elvis in Vegas physically. He's not going to look like Elvis in Vegas, but he looks like Elvis early days. He's slim, he's and everything, and so that was the sort of the method behind my madness was to have a situation where we could grow Elvis, if you like, for want of a better phrase, to actually grow Elvis from a young man into Elvis in Vegas, and not use the same person, but use a father and son.
Brilliant. I've got to be honest. I mean, it sounds, with the greatest respect, it sounds almost so simple, but it isn't. It's what a brilliant innovation. That's so cool. Don't just use the same guy. As you say, markedly different physical appearances. Yeah, I mean, that's blown my tiny fragile mind. That's awesome. Brilliant.
Yeah, well, from what we can gather, we haven't seen anything to contradict that thought. Is they appear to be the only father and son Elvises in the world.
Yeah. So straight away you've got a differential, but I just think that angle is absolutely brilliant. And again, it brings it back to what you were saying about the whole experience, and you want people to go away having been touched, for want of a better expression. You want them to be impacted to the point where I think that can only help achieve that, right? I mean, that's awesome. I think that is absolutely brilliant. That's cool. I know we've done a few interviews with those guys before, so I can call on some of that stuff, for their kind of background and what have you. I won't take the time on that, but that alone that's the selling point for me. And I guess sort of one of my final questions, Marty, was I think you probably answered it, but I'll throw it out there in case there's anything else you wanted to add to it. But my final question is, what can the crowd expect on the night? Why should people come along? And I think you've kind of touched on the majority of it. But is there anything else that you want to throw out there that that's a kind of a selling point or a major plus? I don't know.
Well, this is what I would say, because I've worked very closely with John, who's written the arrangements and has done the visuals and everything. I remember when I went and saw the first Elvis show for the first time. Having been an entertainer myself, I probably tend to be a little bit more laid back than your general audience, who and the fans who go there with great expectations. And I come back to my original statement. What I said was our motivation for doing these shows, and that was to create this experience. Now, what I personally did experience when I saw the show happen for the first time with an audience in a packed out theatre, was I walked in thinking, yeah, I've heard the music. I was at rehearsal. I've heard all of this. It'll sound good. It'll sound great. I just hope Elvis, the Elvis we're using, performs well. You hope everything will work. And then John walked out on stage, because he conducts the orchestra as well, and he hit the overture. And the overture, literally, if you remember that old shot of the Bee Gees with their hair being blown back against.
yeah.
That was the wall of sound that just hit me when this overture started, and the climax of the overture and the big crescendos and the big accents at the end going ba 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 ba, all that stuff, and I went, whoa. That was my reaction within the first 3 minutes of the show, and
Literally
so
blown away.
Yeah, absolutely blown away. And that's what I believe people will feel when they come and see this. They're going to see something that they haven't probably seen before. And I say that because I know there have been some great stage shows, and they go to see these things, and you know, a lot of them are fantastic. I mean, I was in the King and I twice and toured with the King and I in a magnificent production, so I know how good shows can be. But in the case of this particular show, I think what people are going to experience is probably something they just may not have experienced ever before, in a very positive sense.
Brilliant. I'm kind of jealous. I should have said this at the outset. I'm not actually based in Australia. I'm not sure if they told you that. I'm actually I'm based up in Phuket in Thailand. And I'm a bit jealous because I wish I was down in Australia, because I'd love to come along. You've sold me, I tell you, mate. You've sold me.
Well, right now, mate, looking outside of my window in Melbourne with the overcast weather and the freezing temperature, Phuket is sounding pretty damn good.
Actually, yeah. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. That's and you know what? It's so funny. When I was just relaying to you previously the story of the Elvis impersonators up in Tokyo when I lived there many years ago, it just triggered my brain as well. Literally 2 weeks ago, they do a big night market here where, you know, food stalls and what have you, and handicrafts and so on and so forth. And there's an Elvis impersonator even there. It's a little Thai guy. He must be in his 70s, I'd say. And it's weird because he doesn't really speak a word of English, but he sings Elvis songs, which I find bizarre. But you try and have a conversation with him. A friend of mine tried to talk to him, and he was like, "Oh, no." But and he looks the part, you know, brilliant. So again, it just, you know, it adds further sort of testimony to the fact that this legend very much does live on in all four corners of the earth, isn't it? It's quite fascinating, and that's brilliant. Look, I think I've got more than enough there, Marty. I think that's brilliant. It sounds seriously, it sounds absolutely brilliant. I am slightly jealous though. I wouldn't be able to get down there. I think some of the guys are going to try and make it.
I've got to just tell you about my Japanese experience, because when you mentioned earlier, I got to tell you about. I was in Tokyo in '76 for the World Popular Song Festival, and I befriended the boys from Jigsaw. I don't know whether you remember their big hit "Sky High" that they had from the man from Hong Kong. That was the theme song. The English band. I befriended them, and one of them said, "We're going out tonight to go and see a bluegrass band." I said, "In Tokyo?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You're in for an experience." So we hopped in a cab, and it took us. We were in the cab literally for about 45 minutes. It was literally on the outskirts of Tokyo. Pulled up outside this butcher shop. Walked in. There was like a guy at the door with the sliding thing, you know, saying, "Oh yes, you're okay, you can come in." Took us down by the side of the butcher shop, out the back, and here was this sensational Japanese rockabilly bluegrass band.
Oh, awesome!
With straw hats, John Denver glasses, those denim outfits with the straps over the shoulder.
Oh, the dungarees, dungarees,
and playing banjos and acoustic. Oh man, it was out of this world.
It is, and I tell you, I lived there for a number of years, and you're exactly right. The sort of things that you can find in, you know, sort of hidden away in nooks and crannies in tiny little bars, and I've seen some unbelievable across such a wide range of musical genres. You know, whether it be rockabilly, whether it be heavier stuff, whether it be, you know, sort of acoustic stuff, and some of it, and yeah, just absolutely fascinating. So it's yeah, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Marty, look, I said at the outset, you know, I think the term legend is kind of bandied around a wee bit and a bit inappropriate at times, but I think you, sir, you're a legend. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute privilege for me talking to you. And what I'll do, I'll try and, while this is still fresh in